Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Foundation at Home. Welcome to 2023. Happy New Year! Let's go! How about that? It's so great to be with you here at Foundation at Home. When I think through the idea of a brand new year, my mind goes back to my childhood when we were growing up to some traditions, like some black-eyed peas and some cornbread and some collard greens. I need the collard greens, but here's the deal. When I was growing up, they would tell me, hey, you eat a bunch of black-eyed peas, you're going to get pennies. If you eat a bunch of collard greens, you get that green folding money. You know what I'm talking about? That explains why I'm broke as a joke, because I don't like collard greens. You know what I'm saying? That's what. But when we were talking about traditions for the new year a couple weeks ago, there's one of us in particular that had some things that I thought were rather questionable, so I thought we would bring it to the entire internet world for you to also be very judgmental along with us. And that was Mrs. Buchanan here.
All right, perfect.
So you tell me, or share with everybody these things that were shared with you growing up about these New Year's Day traditions.
Yeah.
And they will be the judge.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'm hoping there are some people out there that are on the same page. We grew up in the dysfunction. It's fine.
Doubt it.
So, so one of them was that you absolutely cannot wash clothes on New Year's, because if you do,
check. No problem there.
Wow.
Do you
Listen though,
clothes?
if you do, it's important, because this is the reason. You can't let Brooke either. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
So
Brooke, I'm giving you permission. No washing clothes today, baby.
That's
Let's
right.
go. We just got a new washer and dryer though, so
No,
it's kind of fun.
no. Listen,
It's-
if you wash someone out of your family.
Oh snap!
So
You wash them
can't.
out of
the-
correct.
Please
Hold
don't
on.
do laundry today.
Yeah.
Do you get to
So-
choose? Do you get? I'm not for me. Not for me. I'm just saying.
I mean,
you're
that
in Clint's
is
family,
not
watch
part
out.
Okay.
of the.
So if you write their
yeah.
name and whatever you wash,
That's not part of the
Okay,
superstition.
gotcha.
No. Yeah.
Okay.
So the other one is a little more weird.
Okay.
So
Just
my
own it.
mother-in-law, it's not my tradition, it's my mother-in-law's tradition. She cannot leave her home. No one can enter her home until a man who does not live there walks in the front door, because that he brings the good luck for the new year. This is very intense. This is very intense. So Craig
Interesting.
has already gotten up and gone over to my mother-in-law's home to walk through her front door so she can leave now.
Right.
And also she can have good luck for the year.
Okay. Hold on.
Every
Here's-
year.
So she calls the
She
baby
doesn't have
boy.
to call him anymore.
Oh, okay. He
This-
just goes.
He knows.
He
Does
just
he
goes.
just like
He
walk
wakes
in and then walk right back
He
out?
wakes up
And
and
he
he's like, I
hangs
gotta
out.
go to mama's.
You gotta go on.
Yeah.
So Craig's been doing this for how long?
We've been married for 12 and a half years.
So he's done it every year.
Every year.
And even before then.
Even before then.
So if you are at home right now and you need someone to come into your house,
He's your guy.
Just
Call
text,
Craig.
just
Bring
text
good
the word
luck.
Craig to
Oh.
678.
Yeah. Perfect.
That's it. He's an expert. You just walk
Expert.
in,
He'll just
and that's
walk
all you
in.
do. You just gotta walk
Yeah.
in, and then you can be
Now
done.
she
you have
does
to
have
feed him?
biscuits. She
Okay,
does make
see?
biscuits for him.
See?
So
Let's go.
Well, you may also be.
I love biscuits.
Yeah.
She got some
Not
grape or strawberry jelly. I'm on
Listen,
my way.
You don't even
Let's
need
go.
it with her biscuits.
Okay,
They're that good.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
it. So you put in the comments, you can be the judge. Be so judgy. Have you ever heard of anything like that kind of nonsense? I don't know. But I don't know. But you be the judge. Throw it in the comments. Let us know if you got some other New Year's Day traditions you'd like to share with us. We love to hear about them. Now, when we think about the new year, I think it's always good for us to kind of do a little bit of reflecting on the year behind us. And so we put together a top 5 moments of 2022, specifically for Foundation, that we would like to share with you. No particular order, and I'm going to get us started. So one of those top 5 moments for sure is this facility we're standing in front of that we refer to as Base Camp. We opened this bad boy on Mother's Day this past year, and man, it was an incredible Sunday. From the year of the tornado, and then the year walking through at Ruth Hill, and just trying to figure out how do we do gatherings in that tiny space in the gym. And they were so incredibly generous to offer it to us and make it available to us. And we worked through that, and the load-in, load-out team, good gracious alive, y'all are heroes. And then to open this facility, we've been rocking and rolling since May, and it's been an incredible second half of the year, specifically with the opening of Base Camp. Now, when I look at the other 4, the thing that I'm most excited about, really proud and just in love with our church over, is that only one of our top 5 moments has anything to do with this facility here at 6 Perry Street. The other 4 are all outside of the walls, which fits into our mission that we're on a You Belong Here movement where people are the destination and Jesus is in the lead. And to share those other top 4 moments, some of the staff's going to jump in. Why don't we start with Jason?
Yeah, one of the most awesome things of 2022 is we hit 2 major milestones with the ice cream truck. In late April, we had our 500th event with the truck. So
500?
That's
Let's
incredible.
go.
And,
How about it?
and just 6 months later, though, we had event number 600.
600?
Yeah,
Wow.
600, 500
Wow.
and 600 in 2022.
In the same year.
In the same year.
Let's go.
Over 20,000 pieces of ice cream, bringing a lot of joy to a lot of different events, school events, city events, other community events. It was a great year.
That's cool. I'm just curious, for those of you who are watching, if you had an interaction with Foundation, with the ice cream truck, before you ever showed up to a Sunday morning gathering, will you throw something in the comments? Maybe put an ice cream emoji, or if you can find a truck emoji, or just raise your hand, whatever you got.
A chocolate
Well, I would
ice
just
cream
love to see it.
emoji?
Our entire staff is online with you right now, and so we would love to see who got connected, who saw us, was introduced to what we're doing here at Foundation before you ever came to a Sunday morning gathering. Who's next? Who's got something next?
I got one.
Adam.
So for me, I would say one of the biggest days of the year. This year specifically, while we do a golf tournament every single year, this year's golf tournament was really big because it was the biggest golf tournament
Yes.
we've ever had. Because of the sponsors, everybody who played, chipped in for the day, we were able to raise over $30,000 that's going to go right back into the Coweta County school systems. We don't take a penny of that. And it's just a really cool day because we love teachers and we just want to be there to support and kind of bridge the gap between the financial needs and the visions and the dreams that they have. And so that comes in the form of maybe there's a wish list that a teacher will have, or an administrator will have a dream, but the problem is just the money's not there. It's seating in the cafeteria, whatever it is. And so God just positioned us in a really cool spot now in 2023 to where when those phone calls come or that ask is made, we can just be there with open hands to be a part of that. And so all that became possible in just like one single day. And
Yeah, that's
so
cool.
I thought it was really good.
I love golf, and speaking of golf, and this grass again in the front yard here, when I walk out here every time, I have this urge on the inside to throw down some golf balls and to take a sand wedge and see if I can hit it over our neighbor's church here, the Presbyterian church. I won't do
Please
that,
don't do
though.
that.
They've got really expensive and fantastically expensive glass, and so for sure it's not going to happen, and plus we love them. David, we love you very much. But it's a temptation of mine that I'm having to fight every single day because this is a good grass to hit off of. Who's got another one of those moments?
Yeah, so I'll go next.
Brooke.
So Good Friday 2019 was super incredible. Good Friday 2022 was
Yeah.
incredible because it was the last one. The last one we had was 2019.
So
and
both were incredible.
They
Just
were
only
both
one was a
incredible.
little closer.
Only
Yeah,
one
that's right.
was a little bit closer because
Yeah.
it had been so long since the last one. And we got to be right in the heart of downtown Newnan, in the street with hundreds of people, just sharing why Good Friday really is good. So it was awesome time just singing and just an incredible time had by all right before our Easter gatherings at the high school.
Yeah, that was incredible. For sure, that entire weekend was pretty special. Huge thanks to the city of Newnan for allowing us to have a section of the street to shut down for Good Friday. Enormous thanks to Newnan High School, Randy, Chase. We couldn't say enough good words about the two of you and making sure that we had a place for Easter to gather in the midst of all the chaos of opening base camp. So incredibly grateful for both of you. Definitely a top 5 moment. We've got one more, I believe. Who's got the last
That's
one?
me.
Robin, let's go.
Yes. So for me, particularly, I love Pumpkins in the Park.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Pumpkins in the Park is a really cool event because we've been doing it since before we launched
Yes.
Foundation, right? So it started in 2017, and we've been able to do Pumpkins in the Park every year, except for the one year we did Pumpkins in the Patch.
We did.
Which I still count because it's still awesome. But this year we were able to host it over here at First Avenue Park. It was our largest one to date. It was incredible. We had free pumpkins, kid pumpkins, a rock wall. That was pretty cool.
We did.
Inflatables, costume contest. It was such a fun night and completely free to this community. We love helping healthy families exist here in Coweta County, and we love being a source of that. Every time you do a foundation event, we always want you to think, this is what's best for my family. And I think Pumpkins in the Park fulfills that right there. And I just love it every single year. It's an incredible event.
It really is. I mean, we had hundreds of pumpkins, over 1,200 people in attendance. inflatables all over the place. The food trucks were incredible this year. Jason took care.
Very good.
Just in all the Mad Mexican was there. Chad, Angie, what's happening? Happy New Year to y'all at the Mad Mexican. Let's go. You know what I'm saying? Hey, here's the deal. Maybe you've got some top moments that weren't mentioned in this top 5, and so we would love for you to throw those moments in the chat right now. So what were your favorite moments from Foundation in 2022? And just throw them in the chat. Bonus points if you've got a picture that goes along with it. We would love to see what you captured on your phone this year. Definitely in one of your top 5
Just don't
moments.
steal mine, though.
That's right.
Mine
Don't
was
steal
good.
ours. None of ours, right? Just your own moments. We're about to get started, and we're going to take a little voyage, a little trip north of us from Newnan, Georgia, all the way up to Washington, D.C., talk a little bit about freedom. But before we get there, if you're joining us for the very first time, we've got something very specific for you. Ain't that right, Brooke?
We do. So if it is your first time joining us, first of all, we're super thankful that you've chosen to spend some time with us this morning. But we would love to give you a Mad Mexican gift card because we love supporting local. So again, if this is your first time, we want to give you a gift card to Mad Mexican on the square in downtown Newnan. All you have to do is text the word NEW. That's NEW to 678-661-6330, and we will mail you that Mad Mexican gift card.
Perfect. And if you happen to, I'm only making one text. I'm going to text Craig to 678. Just kidding. We'll still send you a gift card. Craig might even bring the gift card to you. I don't know.
When it comes.
To walk in your door, yeah.
That's
Makes
it.
sense.
That's it. Hey, thanks for being here with us. It's time for us to get started on our talk on freedom from DC. Foundation at Home. Here we go.
Today, I am coming at you from what I like to refer to as my former future residence. That's right. When I was in high school in the first couple of years of a political science degree, I had this grand vision, this dream that one day I would become the president of these United States. In fact, I went so far to make sure I chose the election that I would run for president and win the presidency, 2024. That's right. I'm here today to formally announce my candidacy for president of the... I'm just kidding. It is too late for Nolder 2024. However, I am here today standing in Lafayette Park. Lafayette Park is an extension of the front yard of the White House. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, no, I've seen pictures of the White House. For sure, it's not an extension of the front yard. There's an enormous gate and a road and all those things. Well, it wasn't always that way. In fact, in 1804, Thomas Jefferson was taking a look around and he was in the front yard and he made a decision. He said, you know what? What does this yard really need? What's missing? He decided to put a road right through the middle of it. And thus you have Pennsylvania Avenue. Lafayette Park, though, or Lafayette Square, actually has a lot of history unto its own. At one point, it was a zoo. It's been a racetrack. During the War of 1812, there was a military encampment. And today, it's pretty famous. Anytime there's a celebration or a protest at the White House, it's happening here in Lafayette Square. But we're not here to talk about Lafayette Square. We're really here to talk about what's behind me. George Washington chose the site for building the White House in 1791. Construction started in 1792, and it took about 8 years to complete it. George Washington was no longer in office, so the first residence, once it was completed, was our second president, John Adams. The White House is a symbol of freedom and democracy, recognized and known all over the world. If we're being honest with ourselves, though, the White House hasn't always been a symbol of freedom for those in America. Back when the White House was being constructed, 1792 to 1800, it was predominantly done by slave labor. In fact, the 50 years that followed its completion, the house was run with slaves. It was in those moments that people had to wrestle with the reality of freedom isn't for everyone. In fact, the very park that I'm standing in, not only was it a zoo and a racetrack and a military encampment during 1812, it was also a place for slave auctions right across the street in the front yard of the White House. Emancipation really didn't start getting a ton of movement until the 1850s. But the first great step was in 1863 by our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. who signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all of the slaves in the Confederate States. And while that wasn't a solution for all slaves, it was the first step in the right direction, first substantive step in the right direction. We've got to continue to talk about slavery. It's important because it's a piece of our history, the scar on American history. We can learn so much from it. Like the first thing we can learn is we've got to acknowledge that our country at one point valued people created by the hands of God as property and something to possess and own, and not as human beings or, again, creation of God. We've got to acknowledge that, and it's good for us to acknowledge that out loud. The second thing that we learn from is from the heroes, the abolitionists, who saw the injustice that was happening and decided to do something about it. We can learn a lot from them. Slavery has been a scar on American history, but honestly, it's been a scar on many countries and nations' histories. Not just here, but many continents and throughout the centuries. Slavery has been an issue as long as humanity's been humanity. Would you be surprised to know there was a conversation in the life of Jesus that actually centered around slavery? Let's take a look at that conversation. Let's take a look at the book of John, chapter 8, and see what Jesus has to say. So here's the setting. Jesus has come to Jerusalem for a pretty popular festival, one that pretty much everyone who's a follower of God in this first century would come to Jerusalem for. And he's been teaching and talking and answering questions of people for a few days now. And he's gotten to where there's a number of people that are from the Jewish religion that have made a decision. You know what? We believe that Jesus is pretty significant. In fact, it would go so far in John chapter 8 to say that they started actually believing in Jesus, right? That's pretty incredible. It's amazing what can happen when we sit down and have a conversation with people and really just answer their questions as best we can. And so Jesus is taking this approach. We pick up in John chapter 8, verse 31, and this is what it says. To the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples." So when I read that sentence, that phrase, this thought from Jesus, the very first word that sticks out to me is the word if. Like, we've got a choice. Like, if you do this, and then, hey, I'm going to follow through, right? If you do this. I think sometimes we get in a place where it's like, man, Jesus just is forcing us. Jesus isn't forcing anything on anybody. He's just having a conversation saying, hey, here's the deal. If you hold to my teachings, well, then you are truly my disciples. So we get a choice. Ain't nothing forced. We get a choice in it. The second thing that really sticks out to me is he says it's my teaching. Not just teaching in general, not just knowledge in general. He says, my teaching, if you hold on to my teaching. And now when we look at Jesus' teaching, there's a lot. I mean, there's hundreds of things that Jesus says. Thankfully, Jesus knew that it might be difficult to memorize all of them. And so he kind of summarized. In fact, someone else was having a conversation with him. Was like, hey, like, what's the most important piece of this teaching? And Jesus said, I can sum it up like this. Love God with every single thing that you have. The second part of that is, and love other people like you do yourself. And he says we can sum up everything, all the teaching in those two things. Love God with everything you've got, and love other people like you do yourself. The last thing that sticks out to me is he says, if you hold to my teaching, or if you latch onto, if you keep your hands around, if you stay in my teaching, then you're truly my disciples. Now, that is probably the most difficult part. I mean, honestly, can't you think of a couple of teachings of Jesus that are a little slippery and a little difficult to hold on to? It's not like we don't understand and recognize Jesus' expectations for us. It's not like we can't see them in our mind. It's just like, man, I just can't grasp them. Or we do grasp, like we do take hold of them, but they're just so difficult to hold on to. And they slip out of our grasp, and suddenly what we had a hold of, we no longer have a hold of. Jesus' teachings sometimes are difficult. They are sometimes complicated. But he wants them to know, he says, hey, If you hold to my teaching, then you are truly my disciples. Now, he wasn't finished with this thought, though. Let's look at the next verse. Jesus continues with, and then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, this is getting exciting. It's okay, all right, now we're getting somewhere. So if we hold to his teaching, then we're his disciples, and then we'll know the truth, and the truth will set us free. So knowing the truth, that's pretty intense. Like, hey, I want to know the truth. I don't want something to be ambiguous, especially something that impacts my life in a meaningful way. I want to know the truth about it. Like, just give it to me straight. Don't beat around the bush. Just give me the straight answers. I want to know the truth. Now, what's interesting is when we're trying to figure out really big questions in our life, a lot of times we want to focus on what's the truth for this particular question, right? What makes us feel good about this question? And a lot of times there's questions in our lives that are really difficult to answer. And it just is what it is. And a lot of times if we get stuck on the question piece and we want to have an answer to that really big question, right? There's a lot of things debated right here and protested about and celebrated here at the Supreme Court. And we want to have an answer to those questions. But I don't think the answer to those questions actually start here. They start a little further upstream up the road. They start with some principles and ideas about what Jesus teaches and who Jesus wants us to be. And those things inform these answers that manifest themselves in our everyday lives. And so we've got to start with his teachings and being a follower of him, so that when we get to really difficult places, we can say, hey, you know what? There is a truth that we're going to hold on to. There are some principles that I'm going to make sure that I have a firm grasp on, and that is going to give me some freedom in those really difficult moments, in those extremely difficult spaces. Now, what's interesting is that when I read that, that's how I respond. However, the audience of the day, when Jesus said this to them, this is not how they responded at all. In fact, let's take a look at the next verse and let's take a look at how they responded to what Jesus said. John 8:33. They answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free?" So they take a look at what Jesus says. They take a listen to what Jesus says. And the only thing that alarms them is the idea that he's insinuating that they're not free, right? That's the only thing. They weren't upset with, hey, if you hold to my teaching, and his teaching being some different teaching that he was used to, that didn't upset them. They weren't upset about the insinuation that maybe they could be followers of him. That wasn't a big deal. It was any of the things that normally would kind of stand out, even the word if, like none of that was there. It was just simply this idea of, and the truth will set you free. And that set them off because, like, hey, we ain't slaves to nobody. What could we be made free from? And they kind of call on their heritage. They say, hey, we're ancestors of Abraham. Do you know who Abraham is? There's no chance. There is zero chance that we are enslaved, that we have to be set free from anything. Now, what's really interesting is, obviously, one of two things is happening. The first thing is they're having a severe case of amnesia, and they just have forgotten what they've read about their own people's history. For sure, there is no doubt that the people of God, that the people of Israel were enslaved for 400 years in Egypt. And then beyond that, there was an exile to the city of Babylon for about 70 years, right, where they were someone else's people. And then, just in case that wasn't enough for them to look back in the history books to remember, there's a really good chance that within earshot of this conversation, there are Roman soldiers, because currently, at this very moment that Jesus is talking, Jerusalem is occupied by Rome, right? And so even in this moment, they're not their own people. So I don't know if they've forgotten all those things and they just want to be oblivious to it, or hey, they can call us theirs, but really we're all whatever. I don't know what that is. Or the second option is they realize that Jesus is talking about a different level of slavery and freedom, that they're realizing that there's a spiritual element to what this is. Maybe the reference to their ancestor, to Father Abraham, is fairly significant to them. And so they're saying, hey, it doesn't matter what happens whether it's Egypt or Babylon or Rome at the time. The truth is that God made a promise to Abraham, and that promise is not only good for him, it's good for us. And that is, we are a chosen people. So put us in bondage, put us in slaves, you still can't take away the fact that we are God's people. And maybe that's where where it's at. There's this deep-rooted idea of being free. We actually find it in a collection of Jewish laws called the Mishnah. And this is what it says. Even the poorest in Israel are looked upon as free men who have lost their possessions, for they are the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're saying, hey, it doesn't matter what our worldly circumstances are. There is nothing you can do to take away the promise that God has given us, and that is freedom. Now, what's really fascinating is the way that Jesus responds to it. Because up until this point, I'm on their side. I'm like, you're right. God did give a promise to Abraham, a promise that he would be the father of many nations, and that through his lineage, he would bless the world. Eventually, we get Jesus from the line of Abraham, right? And so I'm on their side. But then Jesus says something that completely takes their breath away. Let's look at the next verse. Jesus replied in verse 34, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin." Man, they did not see that one coming. They were ready to defend themselves. They were ready to talk about the promise that God had given to Abraham and how they were going to hold on to that promise, and that promise now belonged to them. They were ready to go. And then Jesus hits them with this statement that just says, hey, here's the deal. It doesn't matter what promise God has given Abraham or anything like that. There's an incomplete piece to this, and I'm completing the piece now that I'm here. This is part of my teaching, and here it goes. Everyone who sinned is now a slave to sin. Man, they didn't see that coming. Did you see that coming? And notice when he says everyone, obviously he was talking to the audience in front of him. But when we begin to look at it and study it for ourselves, everyone means everyone. It's not just in that particular moment in time, but it spans all of time. Anyone who's been guilty of a mistake in God's direction, that we become slaves to that sin. Now, that has really two pieces to it. The first one is spiritual slavery. It's the idea that ultimately we belong to our sin so much that it can keep us separated from God. That it's the ultimate divider. It's the ultimate separator between us and the goodness of God and the person of God. But then the second piece is the one that we're probably a little bit more familiar with, right? It's the every single day kind of slavery to sin. Yeah, sure, when we begin to get involved in something that goes against what God desires for us, at first it's exciting, or it's exhilarating, it gets our heart going, gets some adrenaline going. We're like, man, this feels good, right? This is good. Like, I know it's not the right thing, but I'm not hurting anybody, or fill in the blank, whatever our justification is. Like, man, we're involved in this. Like, it's not a huge deal. I mean, obviously, it is what it is, right? But the truth is, the longer that behavior continues or that thought process continues, the more we become dependent on it, and it becomes a part of our everyday life. And before you know it, you wake up one morning and you look in the mirror and realize that you now are property of your struggle. You belong to your sin. And that's what Jesus was saying. Do you have any of those sins or struggles? Have you had that moment when you've looked in the mirror? Maybe you were laying on the floor, or maybe it was late one night, you couldn't sleep in bed, and you realized, this thing owns me. This thing's got my number. I belong to this thing now. It's become who I am. Jesus is just being upfront about it. Remember, this whole thing started with, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And he's just letting them know, hey, here's the truth. Now, what do we do with that? What do we do with this idea that everyone who sins is a slave to sin? Is there any hope? Because I for sure identify wholeheartedly as being guilty of that statement, that I've made plenty of those mistakes, and I'm now a part of that crew. Listen to how Jesus responds. Verse 35 and 36. And now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed. So there is hope, right? Jesus is giving us the truth, but he's saying, hey, there's more to it than just the hard truth. right? The truth is that we are owned by our struggles. We're owned by our sin. But he says, hey, here's the deal. While we have no permanent standing in the house of God, while we don't have the authority or the ability to bring our own freedom, he says, but the Son is a permanent resident in the house of God. And the Son does have that ability to set you free. So if the Son does move in your direction and make that decision to give you your freedom, then you are actually free. And Jesus says, hey, I'm that Son. He said, I'm the Son of God. I have the ability to move in your direction. So the question becomes, right? Well, how do we look at that word, if the Son sets you free, you're free indeed? How do we get rid of the if and just say, hey, for me personally, I don't want to have an if. I want to say, you know what? The Son has set me free. I am free indeed. Well, we got to go back up to the beginning of the conversation where he says, if you hold to my teaching, then you will be truly my disciples, and then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So we go back to that question we asked a few minutes ago. What are the teachings that you're having a difficult time holding on to? What are the things that are in your life right now? They're probably firing off in your brain. It's like, man, I know for sure this is the thing. This is the teaching. I can't hold on to this. And because I can't hold on to this teaching, it's creating this slavery in my life where I'm belonging to a struggle because I can't stay holding on to the teaching that Jesus has given me. So what are those for you? Probably one of the biggest ones for a lot of us is forgiveness. It's the ability to forgive someone who not only has done you wrong, but maybe is not even sorry about it, not repentant at all. They haven't even thought about the impact of what their words have made on you or their actions have made on you, and yet we're still called to extend forgiveness in their direction. Maybe that's it. Or maybe it's greed. Maybe you are so buttoned up and so uptight that there is nothing that you have in your life that reflects the generosity of Jesus. And greed is just something that's absolutely taken hold of who you are. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's a lack of compassion where you see other people that are in a place of struggle. And because you're like, well, I don't have the ability, I don't have the empathetic gene, maybe compassion never flows from you, this action that moves in the direction of people who are less fortunate. And maybe that's your issue. Maybe it's just plain old self-discipline, where you know the good you ought to do, it's just difficult sometimes. And we can't convince ourselves to do the hard things sometimes, even though we know it's for our own good. I think the important thing for 2023 is that you identify that one thing. I think the really important thing for you is you identify, here's the one thing that I just can't hold on to. And you ask the question, what does Jesus teach about this? Because that's what Jesus is asking you to do. He's saying, know the teaching, but hold on to the teaching. And so maybe it's not enough just for you to know that Jesus says, hey, let's not be involved in this. What does he teach about it? What are the principles involved in your particular struggle that says, man, this is what I should hold on to? And maybe that's it. Maybe we're just trying to hold on to the don't do this. And it keeps slipping out of our fingers. But we don't realize that there's a much deeper piece to the teaching of Jesus that says, hey, it's not just about what you're not supposed to do. There are some principles that he wants to lay the foundation for that helps inform our ability to make better decisions. So let's ask those questions. I can't get into every single one of them because every one of you are unique. However, I can make you a promise. As a church and the lead pastor for your church, I'm telling you, if we can identify your one thing, let's sit and study, or let's read, or look at some resources. Let's dig in together and ask the question, what is Jesus teaching about this? What are the principles that are laid down foundationally in who he is that informs us and how we make a decision about how we want to live our lives? Because we don't want to be owned by any struggle. We don't want to be owned by our struggles. No, we want to be set free. Jesus gives you a promise. Hold on to his teaching, and then you will come to know the truth, and that truth will absolutely set you free. In 2023, what's your one thing? What's your teaching you need to dig into? What's your teaching you need to hold on to? So you've got your one thing, the one thing from Jesus' teaching that you've identified, hey, this is the one thing I can't quite get my hands on and hold on to really well. And so you said, hey, 2023, I'm going to attack that one thing. I'm going to discover, what does Jesus say about it? I'm not going to get into the symptoms that show in my life. I'm going to get into the principles about that one thing, and I'm going to make some discovery happen and put it to action, right? So you got your one thing. That's very unique to you. I've got one more thing to add to that, but it's not unique to you. It's unique to every single person who's a follower of Jesus. And so, in fact, it applies to all of us. And I've brought you to one of my favorite places in Washington, D.C. to talk to you about it. So January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, granting freedom to all slaves in Confederate states. Now, this was an incredible step in the right direction. However, it didn't solve all of slavery's issues just for the Confederate states and the Confederate slaves, right? He knew that there had to be something further, something bigger than this. He knew that the Constitution of the United States needed to be changed. Because while the Constitution didn't say, hey, go get slaves, for sure, it promoted it and enabled it to happen. And so they started to work on amending it. Now, what I think is really interesting is even though the Constitution had things they didn't like about it and things that obviously were a scar on a history, they didn't decide to throw it all out and start new. They decided to fix it, to make changes to it. So they started working on the 13th Amendment. The amendment that would completely abolish slavery everywhere. And so in April 1864, the United States Senate passed it. Just fast forward a little bit more, in January of 1865, the House of Representatives did the same. Fast forward just a little bit more, and it's April 1865, and General Robert E. Lee surrenders the Confederacy, and the war comes to a close. It's over. You would think that would be when slavery finally comes to a crashing end, but it doesn't. And fast forward to June 19th, 1865, in Galveston, Texas. You see, in the farthest reaches of the Confederate States, there was a number of people that would not give up slavery. So 2,000 Union soldiers showed up in Galveston, Texas, where there were 250,000 slaves still in the state of Texas, to say, hey, it's enough, it's over, it's finished. The Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, changing the Constitution, the Civil War, you've lost, it's done. But to be honest with you, I kind of get it, because I see it everywhere just today. When evil has its grips on us, it doesn't want to let us go. And so you wonder why. Goodness gracious, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed and there are still slaves happening in our country, why has it taken us so long? Months after the 13th Amendment has been passed by the Senate and the Congress, hasn't quite been ratified, but goodness, we're moving that direction. Months after the Civil War is completely over and your side has lost, you are still holding on to it. Evil has this funny way of getting its hooks in us, and it just will not let us go. It was the same for slavery. It is the same in our everyday walking around lives now. When evil gets a hold of us, it doesn't want to give us up. You know, if you're listening to this for the first time today and you're realizing that you have a spiritual slavery condition, and you're coming to realize that Jesus has done something on your behalf to purchase and buy and make a way for you to have freedom, and this is the first time you're hearing it, I want to first say, I am so sorry it has taken us this long, because Jesus did this 2,000 years ago. And honestly, there's no excuse for those of us who are followers of Jesus to not have already told you this incredible news. But if that is you, and you're hearing it for the first time and you're wrestling with the idea of spiritual freedom, I want to give you a very simple first step. Simply text the word BEGIN to the number on the screen. We want to begin having a conversation with you about what a spiritual next step in freedom would look like. We want to make it simple. Just text the number on the screen and we'll begin a texting conversation. If you want that conversation to graduate into a phone call, it's up to you. We can do that. If you want to meet in person, we can do that. And now, those of you who are followers of Jesus, we started this by saying, hey, there was one thing I wanted to add to your one thing you wanted to hold on in terms of the teaching of Jesus, right? So we've chosen this one thing for this year, for 2023, that we want to hold really tight to and say, I want to dive in and I want to explore and I want to hold tight to this teaching because I realize it's kind of slipped out of my fingers over time. The one thing that we've got to add to that was very unique to you. This is very universal to us all. And that is this. We have a responsibility as those who know freedom has been purchased on our behalf to let the people who do not know. It's our job. We've got to do more on that side of things. We've got to engage more. And there will be people in our lives this year that honestly, it's up to us. We will be the people walking into their city, letting them know that something has been done on their behalf. And evil is not going to let them go. Evil is not going to give them back. Evil is not going to tell them Jesus died for them. No, we've got to do it. And to be honest with you, it's not enough that it's written in a book because some people don't read the book, but we can bring the pages of that book and the pages of those stories to life by letting them know that it's not a fairy tale, but Jesus is real and Jesus is alive and Jesus has done something about our spiritual condition, that he offers us freedom, that we can hold on to his teachings, that we can know the truth, and the truth, Jesus will set us free. Foundation, we've got some work to do this year. We got some work to do. We want to take spiritual steps in terms of identifying and just being honest with ourselves. This is a teaching I've got to grab hold of. And we want to be honest about that. We've got some steps to do there. And we've also got some steps in terms of making sure that there are people who are around who do not know what Jesus has done for them, that they become aware that freedom is theirs. Foundation, it's 2023. And I say, let's get after it. Let's go. Let's make this a year of spiritual freedom, of spiritual steps. I'm in it with you. Are you with me? Let's get to work.
Church, here's the truth about 2023. We're on a mission to create a You Belong Here movement where people are the destination and Jesus is in the lead. And to pull that off, we've got a few things that we are looking forward to that's already on the calendar for 2023. A couple of those things are happening just here in the next couple of weeks. The first of which is just 2 Sundays from today. We actually have we're back to in-person gatherings next Sunday. And the following Sunday, though, we're celebrating 5 years as a church. It's our 5th birthday. Birthday Sunday. Let's go.
Let's go.
Come on. Hey, we're going to have all kind of birthday stuff that you have at a birthday on that particular Sunday. So make sure that you're here for Birthday Sunday where we turn 5 years old. The second thing that we're really excited about here just the next few weeks is Church Planting Emphasis Sunday. Church Planting Emphasis Week at Point University on campus down in West Point, just down 85, a little bit south of us. We are pumped about that because we are raising awareness to an enormous group of college students that are undecided in what they want to do with their life, that, hey, maybe you should consider the largest outreach tool in the United States, which is new church work. We see it in our own lives here at Foundation, and we are heavily involved in the lifeblood of putting new churches into fruition all over the country. And so we're excited to bring some of that life and fire to the campus of Point University, so we can't wait for that. Take a look at the Church Center app here in the next couple of weeks. You'll find some opportunities to jump in and get involved. Last thing, because today is Happy New Year's Day, right?
Happy New Year's.
That's right. We've got some New Year's resolutions that maybe are swirling around in your head. Maybe you've put them to paper. Maybe you've said them out loud. There is one in particular that our church really likes to get behind this time of year, and that comes when you decide to have a resolution about your finances. And there's a really great opportunity that we offer called Financial Peace University. If that's part of your deal, if you're like, you know what, I want to make sure I got to get out of debt, I've got some things to get a handle on in my financial world. It's one of those things we do at the beginning of every year, and we've got information on it right now on the Church Center app. You can pull out that app, hop on it. If you have no idea what the Church Center app is, we're going to throw a link right now in the comments. Watch this link appear. It's right there. Boom, magic. There it is, right? And so jump in on that. Church, as we come to a close, I just want to reiterate how incredibly grateful we are as a staff to have been a part of your spiritual leadership over this last year. We look forward to the year that God has given us in front of us. We have no idea what this year is going to. We put things on a calendar, but the truth is we are open to wherever God wants to take us. We are flexible to say we are a part of your plan. We're not asking you to be a part of ours. So we're ready for 2023. I hope you are too. God bless, and we'll see you next Sunday here at Base Camp.
Bye.